Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that we can get this kicked off. And I have my first speaker here, our first speaker here. And the topic that we're going to talk about is something actually quite interesting. It's ghosting in the industry, thoughts from an HR leader on the industry's dreaded problem. So not just a problem in real life, apparently a problem in workplaces as well. I'll introduce Naomi now. Naomi Titleman is founder of Collaborativity, a Toronto-based consultancy focused on driving progressive talent strategy in this new world of work. A former chief human resources officer at Amex Canada, she has proven success leading teams and collaborating with senior executives to maximize employee engagement and ultimately drive business impact. And I'll tell you, she's the right person to be having this conversation with us because she's been recognized with multiple awards for her work, including the Canadian HR Awards HR Leader of the Year. Naomi, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Manjula. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with this. Can you define a ghosting in a professional context?
Sure. So ghosting was traditionally used as a term in the dating world, right? So you go on a great date with a certain someone, seems to have gone really well. You say, I'll call you, or why don't you call me? And then lo and behold, you never hear from the person ever again. So it may sound like, okay, great, that happens in dating life, but what does that have to do with the workplace? And it just so happens that this is actually happening more and more in the workplace, both on, believe it or not, the employee and on the employer side. So that's how ghosting came to be a topic for HR.
Interesting. Now, you chose to speak about this topic. Why? Why this topic on a session like this?
So, back to the rebellious nature of HR and kind of, getting to the heart of some of the taboo that we don't like to talk about in the professional sense. I was having repeated conversations with some friends and some colleagues, some very, very senior and very highly capable, mostly are, and hearing a recurring theme around not hearing back, kind of going through an interview process, seems all good, seems like, they're a top candidate or whatever the case is, and then never hearing back again. And also, interestingly enough, I haven't experienced this exactly, but I've also heard that candidates are now ghosting employers. Now, there was a very, very hot talent market for a little while. Let's see how it goes, through the pandemic and what's to come. We don't really know what's to come there. But I was floored that this actually happens on the candidate side as well. So candidates, signing up for an interview and then just not showing up. So I think it's a really important topic to address, both from a human perspective, so just realizing we're all humans and we've all probably experienced this in some capacity, and also being HR professionals and being very cognizant of what type of reputation we're building or what type of feelings we're giving candidates when we behave this way.
It's interesting that you say that, Naomi, because I have been ghosted in a professional context, but it's shocking for me to imagine that someone may do that to a potential employer, even if it's not an immediate employer, an employer down the road. Why do you think people ghost from both sides of the party of the conversation? Why do you think people ghost in a professional context?
So there is a theory. I actually spoke to a behavioral scientist about this because as I was digging into the topic, and really it comes down to we all have finite cognitive resources to use, and so if we're engaging with an employer or if employers are engaging with employees strictly through technology, and on either side we realize this is going nowhere. There's a dead end at the end of this. Then we don't want to waste our limited cognitive resources. And I think, we're more and more relying on technology to automate certain processes that are either redundant or cumbersome or whatever the case is. So I think a lot of times we're relying on technology to do things that humans actually need some interaction with. So we have to be very, very careful to think about the humans on the other side of this process who are either getting or not getting the interactions that they're expecting or the messages they're expecting.
Well, it's interesting because I would imagine that you have to worry about your professional reputation. I mean, I'm wondering why that doesn't factor into it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think there's three main reasons that people go. So Number one is inadvertent or potentially not inadvertent ignoring of emails in a very, very, very crowded inbox. So, we've all heard the excuse or had the excuse, I missed the email or it went to my junk or whatever the case may be. Number two is keeping options open, which to me is quite pervasive across the industry, especially on the recruiter side. So especially on the employer side. And that really comes in the form of trying to keep candidates warm, right? Not quite sure who my top candidate is, if they're going to take the job, and therefore I'm just not going to even let the second runner-up know. I'm just going to keep going until I have a signed offer letter, and in some cases leave that person hanging forever. So in that case, it's really about keeping people warm or just not wanting to deliver negative news. So a lot of people shy away from wanting to have that difficult conversation. And what they don't realize is that most of us would rather a no or a not right now than to be in limbo forever, right? And the third one is really avoiding impersonal reach outs. So more and more, we've all probably received kind of the cold call that has nothing to do with what we do, and we just ignore it. And quite frankly, in some respects, that can be an acceptable reason to ghost when you don't feel like this is a personal reach out at all. So those are a few reasons why I think people tend to ghost.
So let's get to how people respond to this. What should you do if you suspect that you've been ghosted?
So first of all, I always say assume positive intent. So given the three reasons I just gave, a messy inbox, not wanting to have difficult conversations, or potentially avoiding, cold sales calls, assume positive intent. So, it's very possible that someone missed your email or just had a really busy day at work and, it fell to the bottom of their inbox and they just didn't realize, or, hasn't logged into LinkedIn in quite a while and didn't see your message. So, it is okay to follow up. And I would highly recommend that you follow up. So I'll give an example there. So I had reached out to an editor at the Globe and Mail with an idea for a column. This is 3 years ago. And the editor said, this is great. I'm going to pass it along. I love it. And then, I'm going to set up this, I'm going to pass this on to the right person tomorrow. And then I didn't hear back for several months. And I had a meeting with a colleague of mine, and I told her the story, and she said, you know what do you have to lose? Just reach out to her and see where it's all at. So it's a good thing I did, because I reached out, and it just so happens the reason she didn't pass my article along is because she was leaving. Excuse me, she was leaving the Globe and Mail. But that triggered her to actually pass it along to the right person. And that was 3 years ago, and I've had a monthly column with them ever since. So all to say is that, it's very easy for us to get down on ourselves. It's an ego bruise to not hear back from people, but just know that it happens to everybody. And a lot of the time, it's just people get busy and bogged down and distracted by other things and just forget to get back to you. Number two is you really want to think about breaking through the clutter, right? So, these long-winded emails that are paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. I mean, we rely a lot on electronic communications right now, and we really need to break through the clutter. So if you're trying to kind of, rise to the top for as a candidate or whatever the case is, you have to keep in mind kind of the conciseness of your communication. Are there any bold kind of to-dos or actions? Not necessarily if you're a candidate, but potentially internally at your organization. And even I'm even thinking on LinkedIn, for example, and this is a tip that I'll share with everybody. I won't accept a LinkedIn invitation unless someone tells me why they're reaching out to me, right? You really have to break through the clutter, because we all get bombarded by emails, by communications, by LinkedIn requests. And I don't want to feel like I'm just one of the people you may know that you're just clicking, connect. I want you to break through the clutter and tell me why we're connecting. So if anybody wants to connect with me from this chat, for example, please do. And please just say, I saw your chat, at Disrupt HR, and I'd love to connect. As simple as that. And then third, be self-aware. So if you're being ghosted over and over and over again, you may want to think about a more empathetic approach to how you're connecting with people. So again, it kind of speaks to this clutter problem as well, but if you're constantly not hearing back from people, think about whether there might be a different approach that that kind of is a bit more empathetic and gets to the heart of what they need, as well as what you need from them as well.
And I think the thing to remember too, that to make sure that you don't respond in any way with anger, which you might feel and may even be justified to feel, because that then like you still want to leave this interaction with your reputation intact.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So, which brings me to a very important question. What should you do if you think you're the one that's guilty of being the ghoster?
It's a great one, and you know, I could say I've been guilty of it. I'm so thankful when someone nudges me and says, "Hey, did you see my note below?" Right? I'm so thankful when people do that. It's very funny because I actually explored this topic in one of my Globe and Mail columns in December, and someone who had ghosted me read the column. I'm not Taylor Swift writing about ex-boyfriends in my columns. But he actually reached out to me and said, "I'm so sorry, I'm guilty of this. And can we talk in 3 months from now? There's been a lot on my plate. It's kind of been deprioritized, but I would like to reconnect at some point. Let's put a date in the calendar for April." And it was fabulous. And I wasn't thinking of him when I wrote the column, but it really did. It really, you know, struck a chord with him. So that illustrates an example. It's never too late to say, "I'm so sorry that I ghosted you." It's never too late. So even if it's from 3 years ago, people would rather you close the loop than to be left in limbo forever. And sometimes it's an ego bruise. Listen, sometimes it's a no. Sometimes the person didn't get back to you because they were having a hard time saying, "No, you're not the right fit," or "I don't need your services right now," or whatever the case is. So it's never too late to reach back out to someone and say, "Hey, I know I totally ghosted you a couple years ago. You know, it just, you know, it fell to the bottom of my priority list," whatever. Honesty is always very much appreciated, even if people feel the ego bruise at the onset. Number 2 is really set principles for how you're going to respond to different types of communications and reach outs. So by no means am I suggesting that every single LinkedIn message and every single email, if it's cold, needs to be responded to in the same way. So, you know, I just kind of have a mental model for how I'm going to approach different types of communications. If it's a warm introduction, if it's just a cold reach out, if it's a cold reach out with no reasoning attached to it, I kind of think to myself, okay, how am I going to preserve my own integrity and know that I'm, you know, being a human person, while not, you know, getting bogged down with hours and hours and hours and hours of email, then you never get any work done. So really figuring out principles that work for you and make you feel good about how you're approaching things, and then deliberately managing your responsiveness. So if you're in a situation where you're traveling a lot back in the day, or if you're, you know, just on the go a lot and you know you're not going to be able to get to your inbox, just put on an out of office response and then set expectations in terms of how long it's going to take you to get back, and then actually get back. So I use my calendar all the time. I block, you know, blocks for getting back to certain emails. And so it's just being a little bit more organized about how you're going to approach getting back to people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Naomi. We do have a question, and I just want to say to everyone listening, if you're tuned into this, certainly throw us a question. You can add it to the chat window there, and Naomi would be happy to answer them. So let me pull up some of the ones that we've been getting here. So this is a question from Larry Lal. Larry, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Apologies if I'm not. This is the question. Is ghosting becoming more and more of an issue? And has it been around for a long time?
I mean, I don't think it's a brand new phenomenon, but I do think our reliance on technology and the less often, especially in these times, less availability of person-to-person interaction kind of puts up a bit of a barrier, right? So if I'm not seeing you face-to-face, person-to-person, I don't have that same human touch with you, and therefore I can more easily ignore your email or ignore your message. So I just think there's more channels to get in touch with people these days that can be very overwhelming. So I think I think both purposefully and you know, sometimes accidentally, people end up ghosting because there's just so many electronic communications on the go. So I do think technology certainly contributes to the pervasiveness of this problem.
That's interesting. I think that people talk to me about how there's just an onslaught of direct messaging that people get. As a reporter, I get hit with ideas across 5 or 6 mediums, and it can really, sometimes I think, how did I even communicate with you? I can't remember, because so I can imagine that HR professionals kind of face this. So coming back to responding with empathy, right? Sometimes as a busy HR professional, you need to fill that spot. You have that one goal that you need to do, and suddenly the 15 other people that you've interviewed may not be a priority. I was hoping that you could take this chance to kind of remind us of empathy, how that is something that's important for HR professionals, especially at a time like this.
Yes, absolutely. So, again, technology can be such a tool used to our advantage here, right? So yes, every single candidate wants the one-on-one personal feedback of why they didn't get the job. 100%, we all want that, right? But it's just not possible. It's not possible for for recruiters to do that, or hiring leaders to do that for every single individual. Then do automated rejection letters. At least close the loop with people. It's not the best. It's not personal, but at least it closes the loop and it doesn't keep people in limbo. So part of this is really, yes, ideally, when maybe one day we'll have AI chatbots who can take, a brain dump from the recruiter and actually have a one-on-one conversation with each candidate. But for now, it's way better to close the loop than to just leave people in limbo. And I've been through it as well. I've had situations where I've had conversations, back, before I went out on my own, but had conversations with recruiters, thought it went really well, kind of was indicated that I was, in the process, and then just never heard back. And that's just not acceptable, right? If it has to be an automated rejection letter, it hurts at the beginning, but it's way better than being kept in limbo.
I think it's just as bad as doing that to a date. I'll just add that.
Yes, it is.
So I have a question here from Giorgio. He asks, would you say that ghosting candidates is a strong representation of that particular company's culture? I have no time to answer culture.
Well, that's the danger, right? Is that the recruiters that are on the front lines of your company are representing your culture. So if a recruiter is addressing their business that way, they're building a reputation for you, unfortunately, in the talent market. So do I think it's always a function of the company's culture? No, but it can certainly depict a pretty bad culture, inadvertently, and hiring leaders wouldn't even know.
Great. Well, thank you, Naomi. That was a great chat. We are going to stop this broadcast. Please stay with us, and then we're going to move on to our second speaker. Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks so much, Manjula.